Hello again, everybody. This is Steve coming to you with a much promised video on the Sergenius class, which the Sergenius was what started the whole Earthfleet universe, and it's the key centerpiece to the first four books of the Earthfleet universe, otherwise known as the Earthfleet saga. It, as I mentioned before, it is a ship killer, which is not actually a class. Corvette's a class. The ship killer is kind of a designation of its primary mission. Its job is to basically make much larger ships die. It would be like calling a destroyer a battleship. It's not actually a battleship, but it is a combat vessel. Or maybe like calling a destroyer a combat vessel, where destroyer is its classification, combat is its unofficial type, what it's used for, so forth and so on. So ship killer is kind of that same idea. The ship itself is based loosely around the SR-71 design, basically a delta wing design. And it's funny because it's got wings, but it's not... it's not an atmospheric ship. It can operate atmospheric, but its primary mission is out in space. The reason for the delta wing configuration is it provides the best platform for maximum defense, maximum weapons spread. The wing itself, now in my friend's drawing that he did for me, the wing's a little far back on his. Mine's more forward because this angled wing, like I say, it provides an extra extended weapons platform, because if it was just a pure starship, you wouldn't need the wings. It would just be this straight conical ship, probably a little stubbier, a little fatter and stuff. But in this design, it's considering the fact that this thing is jokingly called the Porcupine once all of the weapons are deployed, and there is a lot of them. There is just turret. There's three basic types of turrets on there. There is a pulse cannon, which are usually like twin barrels, just like this one here in the center, the permanently deployed one. It has a Gatling style turret, which, as the name implies, it is 6 barrels in a circle. The barrels themselves don't rotate because they don't need to. You're not using hard ammo like a 20 millimeter, 50 caliber, etc. like that, where you need the rotary action to both cool a barrel and load, unload, fire, etc. like that. With those, it just follows the barrels. Fire in a circle, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, like you're looking at a clock dial spinning, kind of that idea. And that's those are more anti-aircraft than they are actually a anti-ship. The pulse turrets are anti-ship. They also have beam cannons. For you Star Trek nerds, you'd probably call them phasers, although they're not identical to phasers, but they along the same general line, where you just take a high power beam of energy and fire that. The reason for the three types of weapons is, the pulse turrets are primarily offensive. The Gatling style turrets are primarily defensive, because since it's so small, it's also, surprisingly enough, a huge magnet for fighters. Because the fighter looks at it and goes, "Oh, you aren't too big. I can take you on." Yeah, right. You attack a Sergenius, that's a fast way to die. But yeah, the Gatlings are basically a primarily defensive weapon, although they are used offensively. They are the weakest of the three weapons. The pulse turrets are the strongest. The beam cannons are kind of second tier. Beam cannons are more like, you need, instead of pew 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 pew, you need this continuous pew on target. It's good for cutting, slicing, boring through stuff. Those beam cannons, if fired continuously at one point, just will drain a shield, like pulling the bottom out of pulling the plug out of a bathtub. Of course, so will the pulse turrets, but in a different way. Pulse turrets kind of like kick in the door and beat on the door and that kind of thing. The beam cannon just wears the shield down faster than it can regenerate. So, like I say, they each have their own different uses, and that was that was part of the design philosophy, was to kind of diversify the weapon system so that the ship was as multi-role as you could make it. The ship itself is covered in what's called fluidic armor. I mentioned that before. Fluidic armor, if you want to think of it as, if you want a good description of it, it is essentially like this. This ebony black material made up of billions of microscopic particles and machinery and nanites and stuff like that will solidify when hit. Like you hit it with a beam or something, it will go solid instantly. Even if it's in the middle of transforming, it will go solid immediately. And I'm sure some of you just heard me say transforming and you're like, wait, what? Yeah, fluidic armor is called that because it is I would call it like a semi-Newtonian fluid. It's liquid most of the time. It becomes solid when hit to act as like a plate armor. But then it can transform, it can shift material around. Like I say, for example, somebody is paying extra special attention to your wing over here, trying to bore a hole through it, and your shields are down. That armor will flow from an area of greater density to an area of lesser density, controlled by the main computer using individual little nodes. Like for normal shields, you'd have these individual shield emitters all over the place. Well, the Sergenius has that, but it also has control nodes for the armor. Like if they ever need to get in there and work on the ship and get at the hull and do things, they could literally make the armor flow right off the ship. If you want to think of it like liquid metal, that might be a good way to do it. Kind of like I think it was Terminator 2. They had the T-1000, and they are, and it was liquid metal, and it could change shape and do different things. Well, that's kind of what fluidic armor does. Also, fluidic armor is supposed to be the last line of defense. It's a primary defense in the sense that you get energy that comes through, that makes it through the shields. That will take that impact before the ship itself has to. It acts as the outer hull. There's an outer and an inner hull, so the armor acts as an outer hull. You get a hole punched in you, it will flow over the hole and seal it. It has an exit ramp just behind the bridge. The bridge is this area right here. There's an exit ramp here that lowers down. And oh, wait a second. No, it's not. It's not there. It's back. The ramp's back here. I was just thinking about that because the ramp is right next to the main storage area. And in this area up here is the weapons bay. It's a 2-story tall weapons bay. It's a big son of a gun. Or 2 stories tall, 2 decks tall, whichever way you want to look at it. It's tall, and it is packed to the gills with weaponry. But anyways, back to what I was saying before I go over to that. There's a ramp over here that when the ramp is up, the armor covers it over, and you can't even tell it's there. When you look at this ship, when all the cannons and the turrets and stuff like that are all stowed, the ship is very plain looking. It's just a solid matte black, with just like little evidences of the engines. You'll see the engine ports in the back, which glow like a searchlight. You have the 2 always deployed turrets, which, like I mentioned in a previous video, those are like in case something happens and the armor goes down and you can't transform the armor. At least you have some defense. Then you got the bridge here. If it needs to, the armor can flow over the windows of the bridge to protect the crew inside. So like if the shields go down, the pilot would have to transition to like holographic navigation or visual navigation because the window would be covered over with armor. And the other thing about the armor is it will naturally regenerate. So like say 40 pounds of it is burned off because somebody came by and hit you with a torpedo. It might take a couple minutes, but it will completely regenerate that 40 pounds of armor. And really the rate of regeneration depends on how many control nodes are there. But the more control nodes, the faster the armor can respond, the more it can do. If it's down to only 1, that armor is going to be very limited on what it can do, and it can't do it very fast. It can't regenerate very fast. So the more active nodes you have scattered across the hull, the better and faster it operates. Because you've got to remember, those control nodes have to control all of those individual nanites and special particles and everything like that. anyways, get back to this upper area, the front half of the bottom two decks from about here, well, not quite here, from about here forward is nothing but weapons. It's a weapons bay. Think of it like a gigantic, massive bomb bay. There are 4 forward torpedo tubes that connect into this and are fed by this. Basically, it's a gigantic magazine is what it is, because it's not you roll over a starship, you open your bomb bay, and no, you have big bomb bay doors, but that's for speed loading in combat. The ship doesn't use this very often, but it does have the ability that they send out loader ships, and if you're flying around, you're still combat viable, but you're out of torpedoes or other hard ammo, you roll up, open your bomb bay doors, jettison your weapons rack, which is all these little trying to think of a good way to okay, well, let's just say you picture like a B-52 and you got the weapons rack and all the bombs hanging on these long like metal poles or metal strips or whatever, and the bombs are all connected under. It's kind of the same idea. And the loading system works off of that series of racks, because those will ratchet down and feed the loaders that feed the forward tubes on the ship. If it gets wild enough and you've got to really chuck a bucket load of torpedoes, the bomb bay can open and this thing will just sit and go, it just barf out this big cloud of torpedoes that will take, energize, and off they go. And the thing about the Surgenius is, it is not a warp-powered ship, so you don't have antimatter aboard. It's powered by a coaxial drive, and I'll explain that in a second. But it's powered by a coaxial drive, so all of the torpedoes are plasma energy based. That may not sound as powerful as an antimatter torpedo, but if you do the plasma energy right, it's just as powerful. And the nice thing is you don't have the storage dangers that you do with antimatter. But yeah, you can carry a whole selection of different weapons up in that weapons bay. They're loaded into the weapons rack, and then the weapons rack is loaded up into the bomb bay. When the loader ship comes by to reload you, you just spit out your empty rack. They come underneath, you shove a new rack up in, you close up the bays, flow in the armor, and off you go again. And then they go retrieve the empty rack, take it back, and refill it. Like I say, it has that capability. If you're not in such bad shape that you're really better off just retreating back to space dock and getting patched up, they can reload you in the field and the fight can continue. And again, you don't really see that used in the books, because they never run into that situation in the books where they need to swap weapons racks, or at least nothing that you could see. That doesn't mean that some of the other ships that weren't already in the fight didn't run out of ammunition, so they ran back to the loader ships, picked up a fresh rack of or a fresh bomb bay of bombs, and off they go. And it makes reloading in the field super fast. The ship also has 4 forward plasma cannons. They're bigger than anything else on the ship. The pop-up cannons can't even compare to the 4 forward ones. Those are under direct control by the pilot, although the tactical officer can take control of them if he needs to, but since they're a fixed mount, you kind of have to be pointing the ship in the direction it needs to go, so they generally leave those in charge or under the care of the pilot, which Pendleton does use them a few times. The body also has a number of fixed cannons here in the wings, going down the length of the wings. I think there's like 4 or 8 of them. I'd have to go read all my stuff again to remember, but there's a bunch of them down each wing that are also fixed forward fire. Those would be handed over to the pilot, so the pilot's got a lot of firepower at his fingertips. And then you have the gunners that take the turrets and use them. They can link them together, link all of them together under one command. They can split it up between them, where like the one gunner gets one half, the other gunner gets the other half. Usually they'll take it where one gunner gets the upper half of the ship and the other one gets the lower half, and then tactical kind of fills in the turrets in between. The ship with its AI system and targeting and everything can take part of the turret, so you can split up the work across 4 different people basically, which allows you to, you can either come in like an angry beehive and just bore down on a single target, or if you have a lot of targets but they don't need as much firepower, you can spread out your firepower across the multiple targets. That comes up in Destiny's mission, where you actually see them doing that because they get jumped by fighters, so they have to kind of spread out their firepower to deal with that. They have to deal with the cruisers, they have to deal with the fighters, and it's just, they're able to split up what they're doing so that they can better defend the ship or go on the offense. The system does have rear-facing weapons, so you can't just sneak up behind it and blow it out of the stars, because the turrets can turn back that way. It has some rear torpedo tubes, so if you think you're going to be cute and fly up behind it and try to shoot it in the back, all you're going to do is get a wall of torpedoes to the face. And these torpedo launchers aren't like pew, pew, pew. They're sitting there going, boom. If they need to, they can sit there and just rapid fire these torpedoes one right after another. So like, you come up behind the ship, ha ha ha, I'm going to shoot it, and all of a sudden 20 torpedoes are flying your direction. Like, oh shoot! And they'll just go boom, out they go and downrange, and it all it all draws off of this magazine up here. So there's like a loader rail that goes back here and loads those rear torpedo tubes. But really, unless you get like right up there and you're kissing the hull, that ship has no blind spots. That's the way it's designed. It has no blind spots. So it is really hard to get on a blind spot and kill the ship. One other item of note on this ship is the fact that she has multi-layer shielding. Sorry. I'm back to yawning again. Why is it I always yawn when I'm doing these videos? Anyways. She has multi-layer shielding, and the idea behind that, and let me go in here, I can just, silly thing. Shields. There's multi-layer shields. Okay. Multi-layer shields, is one of three basic types of shielding that exist out there, and it's pretty much true in every sci-fi out there. You've got monolithic, gridded, and multi-layered. Multi-layered is something that's in the Earthfleet universe is unique to just Earthfleet, because nobody else really thinks they're that great. When Earthfleet proves completely the opposite of that. And most of them really don't know how to do it and do it effectively, because multi-layer shielding is kind of a blend between gridded and monolithic shielding. The monolithic shielding is a shield type where it's one continuous bubble of shield energy around the ship. This usually works good for ships that are relatively uniform. Doesn't always work that way, but usually it works fairly well on ships that are relatively uniform. But yeah, it's just one gigantic bubble of shield energy. Gridded. Whoops. Oh, I see what I did. Never mind. Yeah, gridded is one shield, but it's made up of multiple different grids. The advantage of this is you can take a shield and fold it around an irregular shaped object. One good example that a lot of people will know about is like the Starship Enterprise. The Enterprise uses gridded shielding, and that's even that's common knowledge if you're a Trekkie, because they're talking about the forward shields, the rear shields, the shields under the cells and stuff. Like I say, if you look at the shields, they are gridded. And that allows you to take ships of irregular shape and shield the whole structure. Now, it doesn't mean that it's going to be stronger shielding, because, since you're having to kind of contort these shields to be a special shape, they can actually be weaker than they would be if they were monolithic. The problem with monolithic is it's an all or nothing. So you lose somebody pounds you in the front and it cracks the shields, you just lost your entire shields. You didn't just lose the front shields. With gridded, you can also take the shields and you can fold them around an area that's like the shield grid in that area is collapsed, so you can spread out the shields in a different area and cover that area that's now exposed. And then the other type is sectioned shields. Earthfleet uses those too, but those are what are called reactive shielding. Basically, they're generally not up unless they need to be up. They're only like one square of shield energy. They only cover a small area, and they're used for specialized applications. They're not any kind of primary shield. They're there basically to take a beating in a special situation. They can be projected over longer distances, and they have a lot of different uses. Like if you got something flying towards you, you can take one of those and grab an object and shove it to the side. Where, like, if you're using a tractor beam, you might try you would try to shove it to the side, and the thing would disintegrate and just make things worse. You turn a gigantic asteroid into a gigantic cloud of space buckshot using a tractor beam. With a reactive shield, you just go out there, butt up against it, push it to the side like a big broom. The object might disintegrate, but you're still able to push it out of the way. So that's one of the types of shields that are out there. Hybrid shielding is kind of a combination of any one of these three, as well as the multi-layered. Basically, they just take and kind of mix and match shield types to get what they want. Like they could take, say you've got a ship that has a bulbous front end. You could take a monolithic shield, layer it over that, do section shields behind that, maybe do reactive or other type of shields in other places to cover various things. It just kind of mix and match them together to get a full shield covering on the ship. It just depends on what the need is. So that would be what hybrid shielding is. What was one of the... Oh, yeah, that's right. Keeping an eye on the time, so I'm trying not to run us long again like I keep trying to do. Coaxial drive. Coaxial drive is an interesting technology. It's called coaxial drive not because of like with warp drive. Oh yeah, we're going through warp space, or we're creating a warp bubble, and it's powered by antimatter stuff. Coaxial drive, warp drive is powered by a warp reactor core. That's hence why it's called warp drive. Coaxial drive is powered by a coaxial reactor core. The coaxial reactor core it's a pun, but not a pun. Even if it is a pun, it's a loose pun. The reason, and I used to have a good picture of this, but again, when my other wiki, or when I suffered the data loss and I lost my other wiki, and yes, I do have considerable backups of this so that never happens again. But anyhow, there was a little picture that showed how the reactor works. Basically, and I'm going to explain it to you because, like I say, I don't have a picture of it. I need to get around to drawing one. But anyways, the reactor that powers this uses a unique characteristic of subspace. What it does is it takes a particle accelerator, or a particle gun, and it fires the particle down this like accelerator tube to where it goes bang, and it picks up speed as it goes down, and then it hits this device that flips the polarity of the particle. It literally turns it from a regular particle to an antiparticle briefly. That might sound dangerous, but the way it's done, it's actually very safe. Then what it does is that particle continues on, hits another device that reverts the state back to it goes from an antiparticle to a regular particle, and in doing so, when it converts to an antiparticle, it draws a small bubble of interdimensional energy, or IDE, pulls that small bit of energy out of subspace. Then when it's flipped back, it lets go of that energy. So basically, the antiparticle is like a magnet that draws the stuff in, and it clumps up around the particle, and then when the particle is flipped, there's nothing there to hold it anymore, so the particle goes one direction, the energy goes a different direction. The energy is then cleaned and harvested and fed to the rest of the ship. Then what they do with that particle is, once it gets to the end of its path, it's captured, brought back, recycled to the front, put into the gun, fired out again, rinse, repeat. It goes in a loop. So it's coaxial. If you think about coaxial being a circle, it's coaxial. That's how it got its name. It's basically a coaxial or continual loop. And these particles are continuously reused. They don't have to be, but it's the most efficient way to run the ship. And each reactor has like hundreds of these particle cannons and recycling systems and everything like this, and these things will produce a bucket ton of energy. They're really, really good at producing energy. Completely safe. It's not like having an antimatter reactor where you got to worry about the antimatter getting loose and blowing your ship up. They're safer than a singularity drive. There are a number of characters in sci-fi that use those. One that you guys would likely know are like the Romulans from Star Trek. I know I'm using Star Trek a lot, but a lot of people know about Star Trek, and they know a lot of the details about Star Trek, so I figure it's a good reference point. And like I say, it's similar, not the same, it's similar. Similar concept, or at least the closest concept I can come up with that's something that you guys would know and understand. Because there's some, I've seen some sci-fis that have used similar concepts that are way the heck out there that that a lot of you are not going to know because they're fringe or they're old school. They're from the 30s, 40s, 50s, stuff like that. So it's not stuff that most people nowadays would have read and know about, but it's something that when I was a kid I would have read because I love those old sci-fis. Because you got to remember they're working with the science at a time and what they understood versus what we understand now. So They do basically the same thing we do now, but they had to explain it differently. It was done differently. And it was interesting watching them in their own time period and own vernacular trying to explain those same technologies and theories and stuff well before they actually became mainline scientific theories. One of the other nice things about the coaxial drive is you can never overload a coaxial drive. Or a coaxial reactor. You can never overload a coaxial reactor. The reason being is whatever energy is not used naturally overflows and spills back into subspace. And that's why if you look at the power systems on the ship, it's designed to contain this energy, because if you don't have some way to contain it and hold it where it's at so it can be used, it will flow back into subspace. So the ship will never overload itself unless you somehow interrupt or block that, which you see in Destiny's mission, that one of the characters there, Zone, he blocks that ability for that energy to flow back into subspace, and it does cause an overload condition. They figure out ways to deal with that and get rid of the excess energy, but it does create an overload condition. One other thing about coaxial drive that a lot of people don't realize is coaxial drive is technically a glorified hyperdrive. It works on the same principles as hyperdrive. But then again, so does warp drive, which another thing that people don't realize. And going back to Star Trek again, if you ever watched First Contact, and then you watched God, I can't think of who the guy is, but he details all the different ships in sci-fi. He's on YouTube, but he details all these different ships in sci-fi, in books and movies. He covered First Contact. He covered Zephyr Cochrane's warp ship, which is interesting because his warp ship was not powered by a warp core. It was powered by a fusion reactor. And the reason being is it's not the matter-antimatter reaction in the plasma it creates that powers those warp core, or those the warp nacelles. A nacelle is a nacelle is a nacelle. It doesn't matter if it's coaxial, if it's warp, if it's hyperdrive. A nacelle is a nacelle. It creates a bubble of warped space that pushes you faster than light. And all you need is a significantly powerful enough energy source to run it, which is why Cochrane's warp ship only could do warp 1.2, because that was all that fusion reactor could produce to fuel those nacelles. Because basically you create the high energy plasma, you pump it into the nacelles, the coils take over, process that, turn that into a bubble of warped space, and zing, off you go. So like I say, that works the same with hyperdrive, like when you're talking about like Star Wars, hyperdrive like in Stargate, their linear hyperdrives. What's some of the other ones that use hyperdrive? There was a couple of different ones that used that technology. But, warp drive, coaxial drive, hyperdrive, they're not all that different. It's, like I say, it's not the nacelles, and it's not the power core. It's having enough energy to pump into those nacelles to make it do the thing. And like I said, that's not something that a lot of people realize. I didn't realize it at first either, but then as I studied different sci-fis, I began to realize that, yeah, a nacelle is a nacelle is a nacelle. And they're all essentially warp nacelles. Now, hyperspace is just a different name, basically, for a or hyperdrive is a different name for a warp drive, and a warp drive is a different name for a hyperdrive. They're the same thing. They're a plasma-powered, faster-than-light technology. And the more nacelles you have, the more plasma you have, bigger than the cell in some cases, the faster you go. Let me think here. But yeah, like I say, warp drive and coaxial drive and hyperdrive all share the same, they're pretty much the same drive, just powered differently, and they're tuned to operate a little differently. They're tuned to operate at different levels of subspace. And one thing, too, that a lot of people may not know is that subspace isn't like, you have normal space and then you go below that, now you're in subspace. No, there are levels of subspace, just like there's levels of hyperspace. Or not hyperspace, excuse me, superspace. And the way to explain that is, let's see. I think I might have something on that. Levels of space. There it is. Okay, and I don't have my drawing here. I got to get that one built too. But anyways, space exists in a series of levels, and if you picture it, and if you want to picture it properly, picture it like an upside-down triangle, where you go from maximum distance between points to minimum distance between points. And the way warp drive and hyperdrive and all those work is they take you from... Picture yourself in the middle of that pyramid. That's your normal place of existence. Those warp drives create... I think a good example of what that might look like is, think of a submarine. When a submarine is surface, it sits on the surface of the water, and that's when it's fully surfaced and fully buoyant, that's its normal state. If it blows its tanks, it sinks down into the water, and the more air it takes out of its tanks, the further it sinks down. Let me think here. Yeah, so like the more air it pushes out, the further it sinks down. With a warp drive or hyperdrive or coaxial drive or whatever, what it does is it takes that space that you're in and pushes it aside, causing you to sink into a lower level of space. And the more energy, the further you want to go down, the more energy you have to apply. Because, it's like the idea of, as you go down further in the ocean, there's a higher level of pressure, so you've got to have something that pushes back with equal force. Hence, you need more energy the further down in subspace you go. And as you get to those lower levels, the distance between locations is much shorter. At that point in time, you can either tilt the warp field and allow yourself to ride forward sort of like on a ocean wave, or as some of the designs do, the drive just takes you into subspace. It doesn't push you forward. What you do is you fire your impulse drives down there, and off you go. Like in Babylon 5 was a good example of that, where you see them, they open the portal and they go into subspace, or hyperspace it was. They go into hyperspace, they close it out, and all you're traveling at is sublight. Well, the thing is, you're inside that layer. When you're going at sublight speeds in that layer, you're going at superluminal velocity equivalent up above. So, you're still traveling faster than light. You're just doing it on a different level of subspace, and you're doing it, like I say, you might do it at sublight speeds on that level of subspace, but you're still, as far as the layer that you normally come from, you're traveling faster than light. There was something else I was going to say. I can't think of it now. But anyways, that's that's basically how that works. And so and coaxial drive, like hyperdrive, like warp drive. Now it depends on the sci-fi universe, but basically the more energy you put into it, the faster you go. Now, one thing that I did put into the Earthfleet series was something called a relativity limit. Oh, I know what I was going to say on the other one. the scientists say you can't travel faster than the speed of light. Well, that's true. That is true if the speed of light is the same on all levels of subspace. So, like if you're on the main, if you're on our current level of subspace and it travels at 186,000 miles per second, you go down 5 layers. Now, let's say I don't have exact numbers. I didn't bother doing that. That's too much math. I don't like math. I just kind of roughed a lot of stuff out to where I was satisfied with it. It was believable, and I could do my calculations to make sure all my scenes and everything were right. Beyond that, I kind of stayed away from the math because, like I say, I suck at this stuff. But anyways, let's just say on our level of space, it is a 1-to-1 with distance and speed of light and stuff. So, like, to get the same distance as light traveling across space for 1 second, 186,000 miles, you have to travel 186,000 miles. Now, you go down 5 levels, that 186,000 becomes 1/5 of what it was before. Light is still 186,000 miles per second, but to get from point A to point B, you just like that particle of light have to only cross 1/5 of that. So you still can't go faster than the speed of light. It's just that light is now a whole lot slower because the distance is a whole lot shorter. I think if that makes sense. And then if you go down another 5 levels, it's now 1/10 of what it is at the top. So now light is traveling at 1/10 its original speed, but you're traveling at 1/10 of the same speed. Or are you traveling 1/10? No, you're traveling the same speed as you would on the surface, but like I say, the distance is 1/10 of what it is on the surface, and I think I'm confusing myself, and probably you too. But anyways, basically, the further you go down, the shorter the distance is between 2 points, and the faster you get there, because you can still travel at the same speed, and you just don't have as far to go. I think that's probably the simplest way to say that. So if I confused everybody, I'm sorry. I have trouble explaining this because it's a concept that is it's still kind of foreign to me, even though I do understand elements of it. But the simplest way I think to say it is just the further down in subspace you go, the shorter the distance is, and you still stay below the speed of light. So anyways, there are exceptions to this, like wormhole drive is a fun one. The Earthfleet doesn't use this. There are a few races that use this. I don't remember who specifically, but I know there are races who use this. They use a spatial distortion engine to fold space and create a wormhole, and then they just kind of whip in the one side and boop out the other. It's like jump drive, but you use a wormhole to do the jumping. So jump drive, basically you're folding space and you're just kind of walking across the threshold once the space is folded together. There is let's see, got warp drive. Trying to remember. Okay. I was sure I had something. Give me a second here. Okay, that's jump drive. Okay, I was thinking I had that too, because you do have in Earthfleet, you do have superluminal drive. I don't know why that's not coming up. Slipstream drive, that exists. Not the slipstream drive has a really big fancy name. It's not the same kind of slipstream drive that is in Star Trek. It's a different slipstream drive. It's more closely related to superluminal, similar to what they have in Stargate. Even superluminal is still an FTL technology. the way I understand it from the Stargate universe, and I'm not going to explain it here because I haven't actually used it in the story. This is more like a note of what it is, just as a reference to the fact that it exists in this universe. But basically, superluminal and slipstream, they take warp travel a little bit, the concept of that a little bit differently. They take like the space in front of you and the space behind you, and they pull it together so that you have this. Well, yeah, and you're not going down into subspace. You're taking regular space and actually pulling it in on itself. And then you just, this drive pulls it in, and it pulls you forward in the process, and you go faster than the speed of light, and you're still in regular space. You're not in subspace or hyperspace or anything like that. So like I say, I haven't used it, so I haven't really explored it. I'm planning on exploring it a bit in Delta Riders. But, I put this in more as this exists in this universe. A few people use it, but it's not a common technology, just like jump drive is not a common technology. And jump drive isn't common technology because, one, it's extremely dangerous, given the tactical and political implications of it. And two, even the RAS Corps, despite how ingenious they were, never really figured out how to make the drive work properly or safely, which is part of why they exterminated themselves, because they were playing with something they didn't have a full grasp on, and they were pushing the envelope on it. It's like walking around a closet full of leaky gas cans and having a lit match in your hand. At some point in time, that something's going to catch fire, explode, and you're going to turn into dust. But they're kind of that idea. Going back to the Sergenius, I'm running out of time here. I'll close this up real quick. With the Sergenius, like I say, the Sergenius and the Samurai are pretty much the same ship. It's just the Samurai's 20% bigger with more firepower, a bigger coaxial core, more engine power, stronger nacelles and stuff. So it's the bigger, faster sibling to the Sergenius. So if you've seen the Sergenius, you've seen the Samurai. Pretty much any of the ship killers, so the Pegasus, the Raven, the Wolfpack, they're all basically the same. They're just different sizes with different technology and abilities and stuff, but they're all pretty much the same ship design. Also, with the Sergenius class and the Samurai class, the Pegasus would never made it past their initial 20 prototypes, so they never really built a combat doctrine for that, so there's no information on how that would have operated in a fleet or a formation. But Sergenius class have to operate in wings of 3. And if you look at the Delta wing design, that, among some other things, and I mentioned this in a different video, they need to fly in a formation of 3 to provide maximum cover. Once they're in that formation of 3, there is no touching that formation. Those guys are just a rolling fortress. So, and then the Raven and Wolfpack made that unnecessary so you could fly in pairs. Since you had the two ships would balance each other, they were better off in pairs. And the defensive pattern works so that just 2 ships are needed to complete that total defensive area. Yeah, that's pretty much all I've got for this. You can, for the other things about the Sergenius, and there's a lot to read, because it's a really interesting ship. You can learn about the internal layout, weapons, propulsion, defensive, variants, crew, the Gen 3, which the Gen 3 is funny. There's only one Sergenius that ever got a Gen 3, and as a footnote, the Samurais never had a Gen 2 because they were never in service long enough, because the Samurais were supposed to replace the Sergenius, and they didn't. They ended up just being another version of, kind of more or less another version of the Sergenius, and stayed in service until the Raven and Wolfpack classes took over. So they weren't in service long enough to get a Gen 2 refit, and it wouldn't have really been worthwhile for that to happen. The Gen 3, only the Sergenius itself, not the class, but the namesake ship got the Gen 3. And it only got the Gen 3 because Eric, he did some things he wasn't supposed to. I'll say it that way. I'm not gonna reveal that, but he did some things he shouldn't have done, because by that point in time it was classified as a civilian ship. And he borrowed technology and put it in the Sergenius to make the Gen 3 that he really was not supposed to. But anyways, I'll save that for another time. You can find out about that because the upgrade is kind of fun. And again, it's the only ship that had the Gen 3 upgrade. There's been a variety of crew also you can check out that were part of the ship and part of its over its lifetime. There's other ones that are named that are part of the actual Sergenius class. And next time around, I will kind of touch on the Samurai. There's not a lot here on the Samurai, simply because, like I say, it's kind of the Sergenius 2.0 or its bigger brother. So, anyways, that's all for this time, and I'll pick up next time covering the Samurai, probably covering some more of the ships, some other elements of Earthfleet, and other bits and pieces of the world. I might even try to get a drawing for you of the colonies so you can get a general idea what those are like. Maybe add some improvements for the wiki so that you guys can see some more of the details that I've been kind of explaining, but I don't have the picture work to go with it. And if you're an artist and you want to help out and throw me some free images, they don't have to be fancy. They could just be line drawings and stuff of the stuff that's explained in the wiki that I've explained on, like the levels of space and different things like that. I'll take it. Like I say, to me, this is my notepad, so it's not going to go into official compendiums or anything like that at any point. But it would be useful to help people get a better idea of various parts of this universe, and I think you're already starting to realize, because we're 6 videos in, and I'm still just scratching the surface of what's there. So, because one of the other things I've got to cover is the Ort perimeter and the other shield perimeters. I might do that on the next video. Just cover those. Maybe skip this and let you just read it yourself on the wiki, and actually go over here and just cover what this is, because I'm running long again. I apologize. But yeah, this is one of several systems that Earthfleet uses to defend Earth and soul space, and I'll go ahead and explain that in another video for you guys to listen to and enjoy. And until then, have a great day.